Have you ever said something to a woman and watched her lose interest right in front of you, and you had no idea why? You thought you were being kind, respectful, maybe even charming, but somehow it just didn't land. Her eyes drifted. Her responses grew colder, and you walked away wondering what went wrong. If that's ever happened to you, you're not alone, because most men are taught what to say, but not what their words signal. You can say all the right things and still push her away, because beneath the surface your words are giving off the wrong energy. They're revealing neediness, uncertainty, approval-seeking. And the truth is, women don't resist you because of your personality. They resist you because of the message your presence is unconsciously broadcasting. Every time you open your mouth, you're sending a signal. Not just through what you say, but how you say it. The tone, the pace, the certainty, the space between your words. All of it is being decoded instantly. Her subconscious is scanning for one thing: emotional strength. Not physical strength, not financial strength, but emotional certainty, stability, calm control. She wants to feel that you're rooted, that you don't flinch, that you don't chase, that you're not looking for her to validate you, but that you already know your own value. And here's what's crazy. One sentence can show her all of that in seconds. A single phrase delivered with conviction can flip the script. It can melt resistance, trigger curiosity, and make her feel something she rarely feels, drawn in by a man who doesn't need her, yet values connection deeply. That's why what you say must never come from trying to impress. Because trying to impress is emotional desperation in disguise. Real attraction isn't created when you prove your worth. It's created when you own it, when your words reflect that your validation comes from within, that your time is valuable, that you choose to connect, not chase. And when you speak from that place, everything changes. Women sense it immediately. Their energy shifts, their tone softens, their interest sparks. Not because you're performing, but because you've stopped performing altogether. The reason this works isn't magic, it's psychology, it's primal. Women are biologically wired to seek safety not just physically, but emotionally. They want to feel that the man in front of them isn't shaken by silence, isn't afraid of being alone, isn't rattled by their beauty. When you speak from calm conviction, you offer what 90% of men never do: presence without pressure, strength without show. And the reward? Her attention becomes effortless, not forced, not manipulated, earned, because you showed up as the rare man who doesn't need to prove himself. So stay with me, because in this video, you'll discover the exact phrase that makes a woman feel all of that in one moment. And once you understand how it works, once you feel it in your bones, you'll never chase approval again. You'll attract it, and no woman will resist. Most men speak to gain approval, but few speak to reveal truth. That's the difference between being forgettable and unforgettable. Because when your words come from a place of insecurity, no matter how kind or well-crafted they sound, they trigger doubt. Not just in her, but in you. You become the man who's trying to be chosen, instead of the man who chooses. And that subtle energy shift kills attraction. Women don't fall for the man who needs their attention. They fall for the man who doesn't need anything, yet carries value in every word he speaks. That's why most of what you've been taught about attraction is backwards. It's not about saying more. It's about saying less, but meaning more. It's about speaking from self-respect so deeply rooted that she can feel your certainty before you finish the sentence. Think about how most men approach a woman. They try to compliment her, impress her, entertain her, not because they're bad people, but because deep down they don't feel like enough. So they compensate with performance. They try to earn approval through effort. But women don't respect effort born from insecurity. They respect clarity, grounded energy. A man who doesn't speak to win her over, but speaks because his truth doesn't depend on her response. That kind of energy is rare, and that's exactly why it's irresistible. When you speak from grounded clarity, it tells her you've already won the battle within yourself. You've already decided who you are. You're not confused. You're not searching. You're not negotiating your worth. And that stability is what women crave more than anything. Not just a man who's nice, not just a man who's attractive, but a man who is so clear about what he brings that her approval becomes a bonus, not a lifeline. That's the real signal of strength. And that's why the words you say matter far less than the energy you say them with. Every sentence you speak is an announcement of who you are. If your tone says, "Please like me," she feels it. If your eyes say, "I'll adapt to whatever you want," she sees it. But if your voice says, "I know who I am," And I'm not afraid to lose anything that isn't aligned. Everything shifts. That energy cuts through her doubts, bypasses her walls, and triggers a response she doesn't even fully understand. It's not just attraction. It's emotional safety. The feeling that she's dealing with someone who can hold space, who can stay calm, who won't fold under pressure. And that makes you unforgettable. Not because you tried to be, but because you were willing to walk away from anything that didn't match your standard. The moment you stop trying to say what she wants to hear and start saying what's real, you become rare. And when you're rare, you're remembered. Stay grounded, because the phrase you're about to learn only works when you become the kind of man who doesn't chase, but attracts with silence, strength, and certainty. She listens with more than her ears. She listens with her nervous system, with her instincts, with her entire body. And what she's scanning for isn't charm, it's stability. Not surface-level confidence, but the kind that doesn't shake when it's tested. When you speak, she's asking herself a question she may never say out loud. Can I trust the way this man makes me feel? Your words are a doorway, but it's your presence that determines if she walks through. That's why so many conversations go nowhere. Not because you lack the right words, but because the energy behind them whispered uncertainty. Attraction doesn't bloom when you try to prove you're enough. It awakens when you show her you don't need to. The most powerful thing you can ever communicate is emotional independence, that you're whole with or without her interest, that you speak from clarity, not strategy, that your attention isn't cheap, and your connection isn't offered to just anyone. When a woman feels that from you, her defenses drop. Because now she's not dealing with a man who's performing. She's dealing with someone who's already chosen himself. That's rare. That's magnetic. That's what triggers curiosity, respect, and desire all at once. Not because you tried to win her, but because you were never trying in the first place. It's in your stillness, in your breath, in the silence between your sentences, the lack of rush, the absence of pressure. These are the things she feels. These are the things that speak louder than any pickup line ever could. You don't have to be the loudest man in the room. You don't have to chase. You don't even have to talk much. You just have to be the one who doesn't flinch in his own truth. That kind of man stands out in a world of men constantly shrinking themselves to be liked. She doesn't want a puppet. She doesn't want a performance. She wants presence, calm, command. Not the kind that intimidates, but the kind that holds steady when others waver. And when you bring that energy into your words, something changes. You go from just another guy trying to say the right thing to the man who makes her feel something deep and unfamiliar, safety without submission, strength without aggression, certainty without arrogance. That's what she's looking for. That's what her instincts are drawn to. So understand this. Every word you speak is either reinforcing your value or negotiating it. And a man who negotiates his worth always loses. But the one who speaks from solid ground, who lets his tone say, I don't chase validation, I offer connection, is the man who can't be ignored. He doesn't beg for space in her world. He simply creates one she wants to enter. And when you master that energy, you don't have to convince her. She feels it. And when she feels it, resistance fades. Not because you forced it, but because you finally spoke as the man she didn't know she was waiting for. Every woman has heard it all before. The compliments, the rehearsed charm, the predictable lines that men recycle, hoping to stand out while blending in with every other approval seeker she's ever met. What she rarely encounters is a man who speaks from truth without attachment. A man who doesn't adjust his words to be liked, but lets his words reflect who he is, regardless of how they land. That kind of presence disrupts everything. It silences her mental filters. It slips past her defenses. Not because it's smooth, but because it's real. And real is rare. The words that captivate her aren't always sweet. They're not always flattering, but they carry something stronger: direction, clarity, boundaries. A man who knows what he wants and knows he doesn't need to earn anything to feel valid. That alone sets him apart, because now he's not a performer. He's not another face trying to fit a mold. He becomes something far more dangerous to her comfort zone, unpredictable, not because he's playing games, but because he refuses to be controlled by the outcome. He's not waiting for her approval to unlock his value. It's already there, rooted and unmoved. This is why most men fail without realizing it. They speak to convince, they speak to impress. But the man who commands presence doesn't try to sell himself. He speaks like a man who's already chosen himself. That energy is unshakable, and it makes a woman feel something she craves at her core: certainty, not perfection, not control. Just the calm assurance that this man doesn't bend for attention, that he has a center and he lives from it. When you speak from that place, your words hit differently. They carry weight. She doesn't just hear them, she feels them. Because they're not dressed up for approval, they're stripped down to truth. And truth is magnetic. It pulls without forcing. It leads without chasing. It holds space without begging to be filled. That's the kind of language that no woman can resist, not because it's manipulative, but because it's anchored in something deeper than desire. It's anchored in identity. So when you speak, ask yourself, are you speaking to be accepted, or are you speaking to express who you truly are? Are you shaping your words to fit what you think she wants to hear, or are you letting her meet the man who doesn't need to hide behind a mask? That difference defines everything. Because when a woman senses that your value doesn't rise or fall based on her reaction, her attraction multiplies. Not because she's playing a game, but because her subconscious recognizes something she rarely sees, a man who leads with presence, not pressure. This is the space you must rise into, not just for her, but for yourself, to stop performing, to stop chasing, to speak with the voice of a man who knows if she's meant for me, I'll never have to convince her. I'll only have to be myself fully and without fear. The moment you stop speaking to impress and start speaking to express your standard, you stop being replaceable. You shift from being just another option to becoming the man who sets the tone. Because women don't chase words, they chase the feeling those words create. And nothing creates more gravity than a man who lives by his principles. Not because he's trying to dominate, but because he refuses to abandon himself for the sake of acceptance. That alone rewires the entire dynamic. Now you're no longer reacting to her energy, you're directing your own. And that self-command is what makes her lean in, not just with curiosity, but with respect. Most men fold the moment they feel disinterest. They chase harder, talk more, over-explain. They try to fill the silence with validation. But the man who stands firm doesn't chase reactions. He lets his presence be the reaction. He's not moved by her mood, her test, or her uncertainty. Because he doesn't need her to be impressed, he only needs to stay rooted in his truth. That's power. Quiet, steady, and undeniable. And that's what pulls her towards you without you needing to pull at all. It's not about being aggressive. It's not about playing cold. It's about communicating one message consistently and clearly. I am whole before you. I do not seek permission to be who I am. I welcome connection, but I don't beg for it. That energy doesn't just attract, it transforms you, because now you're no longer at the mercy of someone else's interest. You're leading your own life, with or without validation. And that kind of emotional sovereignty is magnetic. Understand this deeply. A man who fears being rejected will always communicate from lack, but a man who's willing to walk away from what doesn't align with his standards communicates from abundance. And abundance is what women feel before you even speak. It's in your eye contact, in your breath, in your stillness when things get uncertain. When you don't flinch, she notices. When you don't chase, she feels it. And when you speak from a place of full alignment, she's drawn not to your words, but to your center. That's the voice she can't forget, the presence that lingers. Not because you were louder, not because you were smoother, but because you were real, and real is rare. You didn't try to be the man she wanted. You were the man you chose to be. And in that choice, you gave her something she didn't even know she needed. Truth without apology, confidence without noise, interest without desperation. So speak with that energy. Speak not to gain her, but to reveal you. Speak as the man who understands that the words he says matter less than the power behind them. Because when your words reflect strength, when your tone reflects peace, and when your presence reflects wholeness, she doesn't just hear you, she feels you. And that feeling is what no woman can resist. There's a moment in every interaction where your words either elevate you or expose you, where what you say reveals your frame or shows that you have none. And in that moment, most men collapse. They give away their power. They speak from a place of hope instead of presence. But the man who stands rooted doesn't try to impress or outshine. He doesn't rush to fill silence with flattery. He understands that real power is in how little he needs to prove. His voice carries calm authority. His words are simple but sharp. And his energy says everything. I am enough before you choose, before you respond, before you approve. This is what creates instant respect. Not loud gestures, not clever lines, but the courage to stay grounded in who you are while everyone else reaches. because that's what most women are surrounded by. Men who reach, men who shrink themselves hoping to be accepted, men who hesitate when they should stand firm. And that contrast is why emotional strength stands out. It's not in arrogance, it's not in pretending to not care, it's in the quiet conviction of a man who knows he will never abandon his worth just to be liked. When you embody that, your words no longer chase connection, they create it. Not from desperation, but from alignment. You're not saying what you think she wants to hear, you're saying what needs to be said, from a place of full ownership. That's what disarms resistance, because she's not just hearing you, she's feeling the absence of need in you. And when need is gone, pressure disappears. Now, she's not protecting herself from manipulation, she's opening up to authenticity, and that shift can't be faked. It has to be lived. Most men try to buy attention with compliments, but when your attention is already valuable, it doesn't need decoration. It carries weight on its own, because now you're not speaking from a place of wanting to be chosen. You're speaking from the realization that you are the one doing the choosing, not in ego, in truth. Because a man who knows his standard doesn't chase, he attracts by presence alone. So let your words reflect your clarity. Let your tone reflect your peace. Let your pauses reflect your power. You don't need to talk endlessly. You need to speak with meaning. And the most meaningful thing you can ever say is said without urgency, without pressure, without fear. It's said from within the frame of a man who will not beg to be seen. Because once you realize that your value is not negotiable, everything changes. Your words slow down, your gaze sharpens, your energy rises. And from that space, when you finally do speak, every syllable matters. Every silence speaks louder than noise. And every time you open your mouth, she listens. Not because you're trying to impress her, but because you no longer need her to. You've already impressed the only person who truly matters, yourself. When a man finally stops chasing attention and starts embodying truth, everything about the way he speaks transforms. His words slow down not because he's unsure, but because he knows the weight they carry. His silence becomes intentional. His presence becomes undeniable. He no longer talks to fill the space, he lets space work for him. That shift, subtle to the untrained eye, hits her on a level she can't explain. She feels it in her gut. It's calm, unbothered certainty. It's rare, and it's deeply attractive. Because it says one thing without saying it at all, I know who I am, and I do not fold. This is what separates the forgettable from the unforgettable. Not louder words, not flashier compliments, just grounded presence backed by inner stillness. When you no longer fear rejection, your voice changes. It loses the tremble of uncertainty. It carries clean intention. You're no longer speaking to gain, you're speaking to reflect, reflecting your values, your boundaries, your vision. And from that reflection, women don't feel pressure. They feel direction. They feel the strength of a man who isn't trying to please. He's offering his truth without apology. There's no fear in that energy. And where there's no fear, there's no need to hide. That's what draws her in. Not just your words, but the power behind them. The quiet message that says, I'm not here to chase, I'm here to connect, but only if it's real. That's magnetic. Because women are not drawn to availability. They are drawn to selectivity. And when you become the man who values his energy enough to be selective, everything about you becomes more valuable. This is where most men lose their power. They give their attention too easily. They speak without restraint. They reveal too much, too soon, hoping to be understood instead of choosing to be respected. But the man who understands his worth doesn't overshare to feel seen. He doesn't speak endlessly to feel heard. He knows his silence is sometimes louder than any speech, and that knowledge radiates authority. It shows her that he is not here to entertain her emotions. He's here to stay rooted in his own. That's what women remember. Not how you flattered them, not how agreeable you were, but how stable you felt, how grounded your voice sounded, how completely unshaken you were by the outcome. That's presence. And presence, when fused with truth, creates impact. So when you speak, let every word be shaped by integrity. Let every sentence carry intention. Let every pause reflect your discipline, because this isn't about manipulating her response, it's about mastering your own. Speak like a man who doesn't fear silence. Move like a man who doesn't chase acceptance. Be the one who doesn't just talk, but anchors. Because when she meets that kind of man, her instinct doesn't resist, it relaxes, it opens. And what she feels in that moment is not just attraction, it's reverence, and no woman walks away from that. A man becomes unforgettable the moment he speaks without needing to be remembered. When his words stop trying to impress and begin to reflect his standard, everything changes. He is no longer performing, he's positioning. Not for attention, but for alignment. Because he's not here to convince her of his worth, he's here to reveal it. Not by being louder, faster, or smoother, but by being the one who knows that true value never begs to be noticed. It simply is. And when you embody that, your communication becomes powerful without force, clear without arrogance, impactful without effort. That's why emotional discipline is everything. When your emotions are stable, your words become precise. You don't ramble. You don't over-explain. You don't rush. You speak with purpose because you don't fear silence. You've made peace with being misunderstood. You've trained yourself to hold tension without collapsing. That's what she feels when you speak. Not just your voice, but your stillness. Your presence tells her you're not here to react. You're here to respond. And response comes from power. Reaction comes from need. One attracts, the other repels. The difference is internal. It's in how you view yourself. If you believe you need to earn her attention, every word you say will carry the energy of self-doubt. You'll chase approval without realizing it. You'll try to perform instead of express. But when you realize you are the value, when you internalize that her interest does not define your worth, you begin to speak differently. You begin to walk into every interaction with calm authority. Not to dominate, but to anchor. Not to persuade, but to invite. Because now your worth is not up for debate, it's already decided. And that decision changes everything. She senses when a man is whole. She may not be able to explain it, but her intuition knows. The man who doesn't flinch when challenged. The man who doesn't soften his truth to be liked. The man who would rather walk away with integrity than stay by compromising it. That man becomes rare. That man becomes magnetic. Because he isn't giving away his power to be accepted. He's letting the right connection find him. And that kind of energy creates gravity, the kind that makes her lean in, not because you asked for her attention, but because you never needed it. So speak with that gravity. Speak with that certainty. Let your words be few but powerful. Let your truth be simple but sharp. Let your presence communicate what your voice doesn't need to say. Because when your energy is clear, you won't need validation. You'll radiate value. And in that space, you'll no longer chase women. You'll attract the kind of woman who's been waiting for a man with the strength to stay rooted. Not just in what he says, but in who he is. That's the man no woman resists. Because that's the man who's already chosen himself. Most men try to find the right words to spark attraction. But the ones who actually create it speak from a place words can't reach. It's not about the sentence, it's about the source it comes from. When a man is deeply grounded, when he's aligned with who he is and what he stands for, even silence becomes magnetic, because silence without insecurity is confidence in its purest form. And when he does speak, he doesn't speak to get something. He speaks because he has something to say. That's what women respond to, not noise, not bravado, but presence infused with certainty. You don't need more lines. You need more alignment. The more you rely on external scripts, the further you drift from your own truth. And the further you drift from your truth, the weaker your words become. They may sound right, but they won't feel right. And women feel everything. They feel when your voice is disconnected from your value. They feel when your compliments are seeking permission instead of offering clarity. They feel when your attention is given out of fear, not choice. That's why your energy must lead before your mouth opens. If your presence doesn't already communicate self-respect, no sentence will save you. Start speaking like a man who doesn't need to be understood in order to stay firm in his truth. That's where all your power lives. When you stop looking for agreement and start speaking from conviction, you shift the dynamic completely. You are no longer a question mark. You become a statement. And women don't chase confusion, they chase clarity. Emotional, mental, energetic clarity. The kind of clarity that says, I'm here because I choose to be. But I don't fear leaving if something doesn't align. That's what unlocks feminine trust, not control, not charm, but unshakable congruence between who you are and how you communicate. This is the frame you must operate from. One built not on needing to impress her, but on being too rooted to pretend. Because when your words come from truth, they don't just land, they lead. They lead her into respect, into curiosity, into connection. Not because you forced it, but because you embodied it. That's what attraction really is. It's not something you chase, it's something you become. And when you become it, your language naturally evolves. It becomes cleaner, sharper, simpler. Not because you're trying to be clever, but because you've stopped trying altogether. A man who doesn't need to be accepted speaks with strength. A man who no longer fears being misunderstood speaks with clarity. And a man who no longer negotiates his worth speaks with a presence that no woman can ignore. This is who you become when you stop performing and start leading. When you stop waiting for permission and start standing in truth. You don't need to say more. You need to mean more. That's the voice she feels. And once she feels it, there is nothing left to resist. The reason most men feel invisible to women is not because they lack looks, status, or charm. It's because they speak without conviction. They speak from the surface, not from their core. They speak hoping to trigger a reaction rather than from the stillness of inner truth. And women can feel that disconnect instantly. She may smile, nod, respond politely, but inside, she's already tuned out because her instinct isn't listening for your words. It's searching for your center. And if she doesn't feel it, no matter how smooth you sound, she cannot trust what you say. Not because she's cold, but because she's wired to seek what's real. And real cannot be faked. When your words carry no emotional foundation, they dissolve. They leave no trace. But when every word is backed by identity, when every sentence is spoken from emotional congruence, it carves into her awareness. Not because it's loud, but because it's true. You're not trying to manage her impression of you. You're expressing your reality, with no apology and no fear of loss. That's what separates the man she forgets from the one she replays in her mind. The difference is never in what you say, it's in who you are while you're saying it. Emotional congruence is everything. It's the alignment between thought, feeling, and speech. When those three are in harmony, you become powerful without aggression, magnetic without manipulation. And the beautiful paradox is this: the less you seek to be wanted, the more desirable you become. Because now your energy is clean. It's not tainted with need. It doesn't grab, it doesn't chase. It simply is. And in that stillness, she feels something unfamiliar. Safety without submission, attraction without pressure, connection without chaos. When you speak from that space, you no longer fear silence. You use it. You no longer fear disinterest. You trust timing. You no longer adjust who you are to maintain connection. You adjust your environment to protect your peace. That internal shift transforms your tone, your posture, your rhythm. Your presence deepens. Your awareness sharpens. And suddenly, you're not speaking to a woman. You're speaking from your center, letting her see the man you've built without asking her to complete him. This is what elevates your communication beyond technique. It becomes art, because it flows from a grounded place where no approval is needed. And in that state, the words you choose don't just sound confident, they are infused with confidence. They are rooted. They are felt. And what's felt is never forgotten. So if you want her attention, stop trying to capture it. Build a presence she naturally feels pulled into, a presence that doesn't fluctuate with rejection, a presence that doesn't negotiate its own standard. Because once she feels the strength behind your calm, once she senses that your truth doesn't waver under pressure, her walls begin to fall. Not because you broke through them, but because you gave her something even more powerful than words. You gave her certainty, and that she cannot resist. Certainty is rare because it can't be faked. It comes from within, built through self-respect, self-discipline, and the decision to never compromise your truth for temporary validation. That's what makes it so attractive. Because while most men bend, shift, and mold themselves to be liked, the man who remains unmoved becomes unforgettable. He becomes the one who doesn't compete for attention, because attention naturally flows to him. He doesn't overthink what to say, because what he says is already backed by depth. That depth isn't loud, it's still. And in that stillness lies a power she feels before she even understands why. A man rooted in certainty does not need to perform. His confidence is not an act. It's an extension of his alignment. He walks into every interaction knowing that his presence is either right for the moment or it isn't. He doesn't force chemistry. He doesn't chase connection. He simply allows what is real to reveal itself. That mindset shifts the entire dynamic. Because now she's not being pursued out of fear. She's being invited into something grounded, stable, and rare. That invitation doesn't scream, it doesn't plead, it doesn't sell. It stands silently and lets her feel what most men can't offer, the absence of insecurity. That absence creates space. Space for her to lean in. Space for her to relax. space for her to feel the calm that only a man with nothing to prove can bring. And once she feels that space, she opens, not out of pressure, but from choice. Because the man who leads with emotional clarity gives her something deeper than excitement. He gives her the safety to be seen. That safety doesn't come from promises. It doesn't come from compliments. It comes from the way you hold your frame, no matter what. This is why words alone are never enough. You can say everything right, but if the energy beneath those words is weak, she'll feel it. She'll sense the gap between what you say and who you are. And when there's a gap, there's no trust. But when your words are an extension of your truth, trust becomes automatic. That's the foundation of all lasting attraction. Trust in your emotional consistency. Trust that you are not moved by her moods. Trust that you do not disappear in your own uncertainty. Trust that you are the same man in silence as you are in conversation. That kind of trust isn't requested. It's earned. And the only way to earn it is to become it. To speak less from need and more from alignment. To stop seeking the perfect thing to say and start becoming the man who doesn't rely on words to be felt. Because when your presence carries weight, your language becomes effortless. And when your truth is felt in every breath, she no longer resists. She respects, she listens, she feels. And in that moment, the connection becomes inevitable. Not because you chased it, but because you embodied it. When you speak from presence, not pressure, you flip the entire frame. You're no longer trying to qualify for her world. You're inviting her into yours. That subtle shift is everything. Because now, the energy behind your words is clean. It doesn't carry the weight of desperation. It doesn't seek to impress. It holds space. It commands attention without asking for it. That's the moment she begins to feel you, not just hear you. And when she feels you without being pushed, pulled, or persuaded, her interest stops being a response to your actions and starts becoming a reflection of your energy. The truth is, women remember how you made them feel far more than anything you said. That feeling doesn't come from charm. It doesn't come from a script. It comes from the alignment between who you are and how you carry yourself. When that alignment is strong, your communication becomes sharp, but not aggressive, direct, but not forceful, calm, but not passive. You speak from a core that is already full, a place where there is no craving for validation. That fullness is rare, and it's what separates men who are temporarily attractive from those who become unforgettable. You can't fake that energy. You can't rehearse it. You have to become it. And becoming it means you stop trying to convince her that you're worthy. You decide you are, and you let that decision reflect in your tone, your eye contact, your stillness. Not because you want her to notice it, but because that's simply who you are now. And that identity is what turns every conversation into something deeper. Because you're not just present, you're sovereign, independent, emotionally self-owned. This is what most men miss. They believe the right words will win her over, but it's not the words. It's the frequency beneath them. A man who needs her to like him will always speak with tension. His compliments will feel hollow, his humor will feel forced, his presence will feel scattered. But the man who is free from outcomes speaks with peace. Even when he's bold, even when he's direct, that peace is the anchor. And it's that anchor she trusts, even when she can't explain why. Every woman has met men who talk a lot but say nothing, who speak to be seen but reveal nothing of depth. You must be different. You must become the one who doesn't need attention because he is already focused, who doesn't seek approval because he is already chosen. And from that place, when you do speak, even a few words carry more impact than paragraphs filled with need. She doesn't feel chased, she feels called. She doesn't feel tested, she feels drawn in, not because you're trying to capture her, but because you've mastered capturing yourself. That mastery makes you magnetic. Because now you are not just speaking as a man. You are speaking as the man, the one who doesn't move to impress, the one who lets his silence echo louder than noise, the one she remembers without needing to be reminded. When you stop seeking to be chosen and start living as if you've already chosen yourself, your entire presence evolves. You no longer ask, what does she want from me? Instead, you ask, what do I require from those who enter my space? That single shift pulls you out of neediness and plants you in power. Because now your attention isn't scattered, it's selective. Your time isn't given to everyone, it's earned. And when a woman senses that you are no longer ruled by the fear of rejection, but led by the strength of self-respect, something in her pays attention, not just to what you say, but to how deeply you mean it. A man who knows his worth speaks differently. He doesn't fill silence just to avoid discomfort. He doesn't overshare to feel validated. He doesn't dilute his message to avoid disapproval. He's grounded, calm, focused. He knows that attraction isn't something you chase. It's something you anchor through the way you move, speak, and hold your frame under pressure. That's what women notice. Not just what comes out of your mouth, but how little it's attached to outcome. And that detachment is not indifference. It's strength. It says, I'm here, open to connection, but never desperate for it. This energy shifts everything. You don't beg to be understood. You don't hope to be enough. You are already whole. And that wholeness carries into every interaction. That's when your words begin to matter, not because they're clever, but because they're honest. They don't try to please, they reveal. And what they reveal is that you are the kind of man who doesn't need a woman to complete him, but is fully capable of creating powerful connection because he's already complete. That completeness is rare, and women can sense it instantly. They feel the difference between a man who needs her to feel significant and one who brings significance into her life through the weight of his presence. The more grounded you are in who you are, the more impact your words carry. You'll find that you don't need to overthink. You don't need to manipulate tone or tempo. You just speak. And because your words come from identity, not insecurity, they cut through noise. She feels them, not just in her ears, but in her nervous system. They bypass her skepticism, not because you forced her to trust, but because you gave her nothing to resist. There was no pressure, no need, just truth, calm and unwavering. That is what creates irresistible energy. When a woman senses that she cannot shake your peace, cannot bend your standards, cannot tempt you into chasing what doesn't serve your vision, she sees you differently. You rise above the noise of all the other voices competing for her attention. You become the one who doesn't chase, doesn't flinch, and doesn't fold. And in a world full of men who do, that alone makes you unforgettable. Not because of what you said, but because of what you are. The moment you no longer speak to prove, you begin to speak with power. Power that doesn't need validation, attention, or agreement. Power that comes from a man who has nothing to hide, nothing to chase, and nothing to prove. Only truth to express. That kind of voice isn't loud. It's steady. It doesn't beg to be heard. It commands presence through its simplicity. And in a world that's addicted to noise, that simplicity becomes magnetic. Because it speaks to something deeper in her. Not just her ears, but her instincts, her emotions. Her subconscious need to feel the strength of someone who doesn't waver. When you embody that energy, you stop adjusting your truth to avoid discomfort. You stop filtering yourself to stay agreeable. You stop breaking your boundaries just to be seen as kind. You realize that the man who speaks what is real, calmly, clearly, and unapologetically, will always be remembered. Not because he was trying to be remembered, but because his words were born from alignment, not approval seeking. You stop being another man who talks. You become the man whose presence says more than any sentence ever could. The man whose silence carries the weight of discipline. The man who is heard even before he speaks. That presence only comes from inner leadership. When you've mastered your emotional state, when you've faced yourself and refused to abandon who you are just to be liked, everything about you sharpens. Your focus, your energy, your awareness. Now your conversations aren't about fitting in, they're about filtering. You no longer want everyone to like you. You only want to be seen by the ones who recognize truth when they hear it. That shift makes you powerful, because now you're not just attracting women, you're attracting alignment. And that's when connection becomes real. No woman is drawn to a man who needs her approval to feel strong. She is drawn to the man who already feels strong within himself, because that strength gives her a reason to trust, not with her logic, but with her emotion. She feels safe in your consistency. She feels challenged by your clarity. She feels magnetized by your refusal to shrink. And that's when everything opens. When she's no longer evaluating your performance, but responding to your presence. Let your words come from truth, not tactics. Let your attention come from choice, not desperation. Let your energy communicate what your mouth doesn't have to explain. And let your identity lead the conversation, not your insecurity. Because when who you are is louder than what you say, she listens differently. She leans in. Not because you played a perfect role, but because you were too rooted to pretend. This is how you become irresistible, not through performance, but through presence, not through force, but through truth. You stop chasing her and start attracting what mirrors your standard. Because the man who leads himself doesn't just speak with power, he lives in it. And that is what she cannot walk away from. Every time you speak from a place of self-ownership, you create clarity, not just in what you say, but in who you are. That clarity eliminates confusion. It removes guesswork. It replaces the unstable energy of trying to impress with the steady force of emotional truth. And the moment a woman feels that clarity in you, she lowers her guard. Not because you convinced her to, but because her instincts trust what doesn't shift under pressure. You're no longer filtered, edited, or diluted. You're whole, present, aligned. And alignment doesn't need to convince, it just needs to be felt. That's why your voice must come from your identity, not your insecurity. If your self-worth rises and falls based on how she reacts, your tone will betray you. Your words will betray you. You'll speak with too much urgency. You'll explain too much. You'll seek reassurance in her eyes instead of standing firm in your own truth. But when you speak with the calm of a man who's already validated himself, everything about your energy changes. You don't rush. You don't cling. You don't try to win her attention. You hold your own. That self-command is what she notices because it's rare, and rare creates impact. Most men lose that edge because they give their power away in small, invisible ways. They avoid saying what they truly believe to keep the peace. They stay quiet when something bothers them to avoid being seen as too much. They smile when they should be silent. They agree when they should walk away. And all of it seems polite on the surface, but underneath, it's self-betrayal. And women can feel it, not consciously at first, but emotionally. They sense the lack of inner structure. They feel the wobble in your spirit. And no matter how attractive you appear, they cannot trust what doesn't stand. Trust is built in the moments you choose yourself over comfort. When you express your boundaries without raising your voice. When you say no without guilt. When you don't explain yourself to be understood, you explain because it's true. That emotional authority tells her that you are safe, not because you are agreeable, but because you are solid. And a woman feels most free around a man who is not afraid to be fully himself. Your words don't need to be loud to be heard. They need to be honest to be felt. They need to come from a man who has nothing to hide and nothing to chase. A man who values his peace more than approval, who values his direction more than attention, and who values his truth more than short-term acceptance. That man doesn't need to manipulate attraction. He becomes the gravitational force that draws it in effortlessly. This is what makes you unforgettable, not because of how much you say, but because of how real you are when you speak. When your voice reflects the strength of your standards, and your presence reflects the discipline behind your words, resistance dissolves. And what's left is connection, genuine, unshakable, and earned. The words that move her most are not the ones that sound impressive. They're the ones that come from a man who's done the inner work, a man who doesn't posture, a man who doesn't flinch, a man who has faced his own doubts and turned them into discipline. She feels it in the space between your words, in the way you don't rush to fill silence, in the way you hold eye contact not to intimidate, but because you are grounded. That grounding becomes the difference between being interesting for a moment and unforgettable for a lifetime. Because when a man's soul is still, his presence speaks before his mouth ever does. You can't fake that stillness. It's built through self-respect, through honoring your own boundaries when no one's watching, through choosing what's right over what's easy, through walking away from what doesn't serve your vision even when it's tempting. Every one of those decisions adds weight to your words, not artificial confidence, but earned conviction. And that conviction is what resonates with her on a level she can't explain. Because while charm fades and appearance shifts, the presence of a man who knows who he is never loses its impact. When you speak from that place, you don't chase validation. You reflect value. You don't speak to be chosen. You speak because your voice carries truth. That truth may not always be what she wants to hear, but it will always be what she respects. Because deep down, every woman is looking for one thing: consistency. Consistency in your energy. Consistency in your standard. Consistency in your self-control. And when she sees that your words don't fluctuate with her mood, that your tone doesn't change based on how much attention she gives you, she begins to feel safe, not coddled, but safe in your certainty. Certainty is not arrogance. It's not domination. It's not force. It's the quiet power of a man who doesn't abandon himself, no matter who walks into the room. That is what makes you rise above the noise. That is what separates you from the countless others who try to impress with rehearsed lines and calculated charm. You speak differently because you think differently. You move with clarity, you engage from principle, and you let your energy do what your words can't. Create undeniable presence. Presence is what she remembers. Not because you demanded her attention, but because your stillness gave her no reason to doubt you. You didn't sell yourself. You didn't try to earn interest. You became so centered, so unapologetically whole, that her mind stopped and her heart listened. Because what you offered wasn't a performance, it was truth. And truth doesn't need to be polished to be powerful. It just needs to be real. That's what she feels when you speak from alignment. That's what keeps echoing long after the conversation ends. That's the kind of voice no woman can resist, because it's the voice of a man who finally stopped resisting himself. When your voice is rooted in self-mastery, everything about your presence begins to shift. You no longer speak with the energy of someone trying to get something. You speak with the energy of someone who has already become something. And that energy speaks louder than any sentence ever will. Because it's not just what you say, it's the invisible message behind it. The message that says, I don't need anything from you to feel complete. That message hits differently. It quiets the noise. It cuts through her doubts. It reaches something real. And it's not what she's used to hearing, because most men speak to gain her. You speak because you've already claimed yourself. That internal shift makes you magnetic. Not because you're doing more, but because you've stripped away the need to prove. You stop over-explaining, you stop overcompensating, you stop trying to shape her perception of you, and instead, you stand in the truth of who you are. That kind of clarity feels rare, and what's rare commands respect. It doesn't beg to be seen. It makes people stop and feel. And the more you live from that clarity, the more power your words carry, even when they're few. A man who is emotionally disciplined doesn't flinch when he's misunderstood. He doesn't chase after clarity that isn't willingly offered. He understands that his value is not tied to being agreed with. It's tied to staying grounded in truth. That understanding radiates through his voice. It brings calm. It brings certainty. It brings presence.